What's up, guys, and welcome back to The Question, where you have the questions and I have the answers. And no one asked for this, but with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, this was something actually that my brother asked. Or he didn't really ask, it was like a whole long discussion that ended up with me having to explain it. And I realized that if he has these questions, a lot of other people might also have these questions. And so this is going to be me trying to explain how the Supreme Court works and how their rulings affect us, because I think there's a lot of confusion around what exactly Roe v. Wade did, what exactly it means, and basically the cause and effect that all of this is having, and how our judiciary system interacts with every other branch of the federal government. But before we get started, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, share. I do mostly political, educational, historical stuff, but sometimes I will do film review and analysis. I just finished Stranger Things Volume 4, and I have so many opinions on one, Stranger Things as a whole, but two, especially this season. So if you want to see that, please comment below, though I'll probably make a video about it anyway. That being said, without further ado, let's get on to the video. So Roe v. Wade was recently overturned, and I feel like people don't understand how that happened or how that works. So let's start with the beginning of the Supreme Court and what powers the Supreme Court has. So the Supreme Court interprets the laws. So I feel like we just all chalk up our government to like, oh, they make these laws and this is what we have to do now. But it's way more complicated than that. So the Congress, which is the legislative branch, they write the laws. They don't pass many laws because they all argue over what is supposed to be in the law and whether the law is ethical or not, whether they like it or not. But Congress writes laws. And the president is in charge of enforcing those laws. Which is why he gets a say on like what laws pass. And the Supreme Court interprets the laws. And you're like, well, if the laws are written, why do they have to be interpreted? It's because if you know anything about our Congress and how laws are written, they're written very open and vaguely. And they try to stuff as many clauses into laws as possible in order to get it passed, make everybody happy. Which is why there's so many arguments about how the different amendments and how the Constitution can be interpreted, because no one really knows, because these people aren't alive anymore. They can't tell us what they meant when they wrote these things, and because our society is always growing and shifting and evolving, we have to look back on old laws and try and figure out how they apply to today, and so that's what we have the Supreme Court for. But the Supreme Court isn't the only judiciary system we have in America. We have local courts, we have state courts, we have regional courts, and it's all a system that slowly works its way up to the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court isn't the immediate, like if you have an issue, like you're being sued by someone and it's like a First Amendment thing, you don't immediately go to the Supreme Court. You go to your local court, then your state court, and then you keep, if you think that if you've lost and you think you should have won, you keep applying it until eventually you reach the Supreme Court, if you don't reach the outcome that you like. But actually I think the Supreme Court ruled that you can't do that anymore, so I don't know how that's gonna work. But yeah, that is, in the grand scheme of things, what the Supreme Court does. So now how does that affect Roe v. Wade? What do these interpretations do? So as I said, if there is a dispute over a law that's applied, like for example, Roe v. Wade, and I don't remember the exact court cases, but the ones that gave us same-sex marriage and interracial marriage are all under the 14th Amendment. So, for example, with Roe v. Wade, is that someone had an issue with this person getting an abortion or having access to an abortion. Same thing with Casey versus Planned Parenthood. there was an issue with this thing, and local courts were like, no, this person's in the right, and so they appealed it, and they went up to higher and higher and higher courts until they got to the Supreme Court, and they said, hey, basically, should the government be allowed to restrict what kind of medical care I can receive in my personal life? And the Supreme Court looked through all of the existing laws that we have already, the existing precedents, and they saw that in the 14th Amendment there's a right to privacy clause. And so they said, hey, based on this pre-existing law, we have decided that no, the government cannot make decisions restricting what kind of medical care you can have access to in your personal life. So that set a precedent of the right to privacy, specifically the right to medical privacy, as I mentioned in my last video about Roe v. Wade. So that is how the Supreme Court works. They don't create new laws. They don't write out new laws. They don't say, hey, everybody has the right to abortion or the right to health care. They just look at pre-existing laws. They look at a court case and they say, hey, it can be interpreted this way, and that's what the majority votes to interpret it as, and therefore it must now be interpreted this specific way forever until something is overturned. And so that is what happened, is basically a case happened that calls into question these same rights and the same laws that Roe v. Wade did. And just like with Roe v. Wade, it works its way up through the court system and it gets to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has to look at the case and look at the pre-existing laws and the pre-existing rulings and have to be like, is this still applicable to today's society? So the Dobbs case looks back at, once again, the 14th Amendment, looks back at, once again, Roe v. Wade and Casey v. Planned Parenthood, and ask, is this previous interpretation still up to date with modern society? And this time they decided no. They decided that the previous ruling was incorrect, that it's no longer applicable to today. And therefore they are going to rule differently than they ruled originally when this law was called into question. So they didn't just look back on Roe v. Wade and decide to try again. A new case concerning the same laws had to come up for them to reinterpret it. And I feel like a lot of people interpret the overturning of Roe v. Wade as them looking back at old cases and just deciding again, ruling on them again. But that's not what happens. In order to get something overturned, you have to have a new case that makes it to the Supreme Court that applies to these same laws, that they then can rule differently than when they originally ruled it. And there are laws in local courts, concerning businesses or concerning policemen, that, not laws, but judicial practices that prevent people in local courts from doing this. So something that you've heard, I don't know what the name of it is, but if a policeman is sued for police brutality or unnecessary violence, and the court ruled in the policeman's favor that no, there wasn't, he was just doing his job. Every time a similar court case comes up like that, they can look back on those previous rulings and be like, well, this is how we've ruled every other time. This is how we're going to rule it again. And usually that's what courts do. But the Supreme Court didn't do that this time. Instead, they looked back and they said, hey, we don't agree with how this other Supreme Court handled this case, so we're going to change it this time. And now another thing that came up before Roe v. Wade was overturned was the Congress's attempt to codify Roe v. Wade. and the right to abortion. What that means is that Congress had the opportunity to explicitly write a law that gives people the right to abortion care and the right to an abortion, which means that instead of having to interpret the law interpret the ruling, the Dobbs ruling, based off of Roe v. Wade, Casey vs. Planned Parenthood, and the 14th Amendment, they would have to interpret it based off of the new law that explicitly stated that abortion was a constitutional right, or that people had the right to abortion. But that didn't work, and therefore they had to go off of the old rulings, and they decided to interpret it differently. I hope that answered a lot of questions. I hope that made the federal government and the judiciary system, the Supreme Court, understandable. Like, now you have this new knowledge that can help you in your activism and in your education. And yeah, I hope this was helpful. That's all I got. That being said, so long and thanks for all the fish. Be excellent to each other, and party on, dudes.